Welcome one, welcome all to the 706 podcast, the podcast in which we rate, review, and rank films to determine a final scientific objective list of the 706 greatest films of all time. This is episode 101. We just had our 100 episode spectacular reviewing the HBO series Vinyl. So we're starting a new century. We're very excited to start this new step in our podcasting journey. And we're going to kick it off with Frailty. This is a film by the actor, Bill Paxton, best known as an actor, also a filmmaker. And this was released in 2001. It stars Mr. Paxton himself, Matthew McConaughey, Powers Booth, among others. And this is sort of a horror film, drama, thriller. I think Wikipedia calls it a Southern Gothic psychological thriller, which is as good a description as any. So I will let my co-hosts introduce themselves. Let's go alphabetical order this time. Keep it nice and neat, nice and organized. You know I like that.
Anthony. I am Connor.
I'm Kirk. Technically, it's not alphabetical order. I've changed my name from Kirk to CIRK. So I'm breaking tradition, but that's all right.
Thank you, sir. You got that. Made the same joke. All right. And then I believe later in this episode, this is as we record, it's early January. We're going to do a little bit of a best of 2023 recap. Things might get a little spicy. They might get a little heated. That's the sense I'm getting from some of our preliminary discussions. We'll see where that takes us. But we're going to start with our usual section. We're going to start with the movie Frailty. Before I give my spiel, I'll let my co-hosts do theirs, but just as a means of introduction, I'll say kind of what the film is. Basically, this movie is about a serial killer, and it begins with sort of a frame narrative. There's sort of the frame narrative, and then there's the bulk of the actual story. In the frame narrative, we have Matthew McConaughey in an FBI agent's office. This is Powers Booth's character. And he's basically telling him, I know who this God hand killer is, and it's my brother. And he tells this whole story from his childhood about how he knows that was his brother because when they were young boys, their father came to them and said, I had a vision. I saw an angel. He says we were put on earth to destroy demons, and the demons are human beings with names and addresses. So he draws his two young sons into this world of religious fanaticism, chaos, and murder. And as the movie kind of develops, things get a little bit more complicated, and we can certainly get into that and talk about how this movie ends later on. But for now, why don't we just start with kind of our general impressions, what we thought of the movie? Have we seen it before? From my memory, I think Kirk is the only one who's seen it before. Why don't we start with Connor this time? Connor, what did you think of Frailty?
Well, Tony, thank you. I chose this movie. I think it felt right as a kind of like a somewhat of a hidden gem we can dust off, something from the not too distant past, but still a pretty long time ago now. This is, several decades ago. It's hard to think about. I mean, it doesn't feel like that long ago, but I think it was an interesting time period to look at, interesting kind of movies to look at. Interesting too, kind of Bill Paxton as a director. I didn't even look up what else he's directed. It is interesting, kind of an actor's movie, and definitely it is an actor's movie. It is like an actor's vehicle. I think like Bill Paxton and obviously Matthew McConaughey are both like real like doing their thing. It is a very like amazing performances, especially the Bill Paxton role, who is this father character who is overcome by visions, leading him to basically embark on this like serial killing rampage. But for these religious reasons, right? He has these religious visions, and he's just sort of reluctant killer. And obviously that is like a really crazy thing to watch and to see as he kind of interacts with his sons, who he loves, and how he, gets them to join him in his plan. That is really interesting. Matthew McConaughey, obviously this is like, I guess, a fairly like early, role for him, I guess. It's a really interesting performance. I didn't think it was as interesting a role that he had. What I will say is though, I do like I like the central idea of this conflict of, as we watch this family, I thought it was a little bit too reliant on, I thought they could have just spent much more time just sitting in that conflict, in that dynamic of those characters, kind of in the confusion of that, of what would be like for a kid. I mean, I think they instantly kind of, this movie plays out as a kind of thriller where we are sort of in the perspective of Fenton, the older brother, who's the one who he never kind of goes along with this plan, but he's kind of, you're trapped in this nightmare scenario of, okay, my father, who I love, has this idea, and then how do I kind of go along with it enough? How can I prevent it from happening, right? And I thought that was not as interesting as if, like, for instance, if both had kind of been equally ambivalent, or like, equally. I mean, I feel like it's just like, it's hard to believe that he couldn't find anyone to help him. I thought that was kind of like, it was hard to kind of to buy a little bit. It kind of lowered itself from being, like, to me, like a very interesting, like, character study, to being a little bit more of like just like a thriller. And then it comes in at the end too, with kind of like the twist ending of the fact that the person we're talking to, who we think is Fenton, who passes himself off as Fenton, is actually Adam. I thought it relies on these kind of plot twists, when I was hoping it'd be much more of like a deep kind of like meditative, like character study kind of thing, but it was just kind of more of like a thriller. So it didn't like knock my socks off, but I'm curious like what more we can like draw out of it, and what we can discuss, and why this spoke so much to Tony. I'm really curious to hear like what moments he would point out as really speaking to him. But that was my general take.
Okay, makes sense. And why don't you bring us in, Anthony? What do you think?
Well, first I got to say is I watched this movie the way it's meant to be, and the way Tony prefers all movies be watched, which is I watched it on Tubi, which meant every 30 minutes to 40 minutes I had a commercial for the Whopper. And I kept thinking how essential that was to the experience. So I just had to get that off my chest. The second thing I got to say is I saw the Blu-ray cover online when I was searching for where to watch this movie. And I saw on the cover that Stephen King has a blurb. It's kind of dotted out, and it's just edge of your seat entertainment, which is the most Stephen King review of anything I've ever seen, but also kind of hyped, and it prepped me for a kind of movie that was maybe a bit more of the Southern Gothic thriller that Tony described IMDb having listed maybe before. But what I got was a much slower, kind of human look at what it means to kind of have this strange sort of message from God, in which God is sort of the villain by the end of the film, which is kind of a cool, very lofty, very late 90s kind of approach to the subject of religion, in kind of Connor's favorite way in this moment of the end of history. But I got to say is like, it's the type of movie I feel like if I had heard that it was originally a book based, like written by like Cormac McCarthy or like even Stephen King himself, I probably would have expected it or attributed to it a bit more kind of the social positive review than maybe I'm about to give it. Because I do agree with Connor that the key interest for me in the movie is what it would be like to be that kid who hears this from your dad, who hears the story that he's sent to kind of kill these people. And to have your dad tell you this, and to have your brother claim to see this stuff as well. What would it be like to be that kid? I wanted a bit more of that tension and a bit more of that mindset told to me as the viewer, as opposed to simply the kind of story beats of him trying to tell a sheriff, trying to convince someone else that what's happening. And so maybe I'll have more to say as we discuss more particular scenes. I'll say that the movie worked for me overall, but I don't know how much I liked the movie and how much I thought the movie was necessarily good or even great enough for the 706. I definitely saw the Tony recipes. I saw the Tony ingredients sprinkled out. I could see why he offered it as something for us to watch. And I could see that there's going to be kind of a lot of substance, I think, for us to get to. Just as a kind of quick note, I also am curious if anyone has any thoughts on how male this movie is. And I don't mean that necessarily as something to subtract from it, but that there's essentially 2 or 3 female characters the whole time. One of which, of course, ends up being the first victim of the dad. The second is, I think, the vision of the mom being killed towards the end, and a kind of secretary receptionist at this police station in this kind of twist ending in which Matthew McConaughey is a sheriff in this town. Just something I kind of was thinking about as I wrapped up the movie. But anyway, I'll have more to say in just a second.
All right, very good. A lot of good leads there to take. I agree about the the maleness of the film. I think that's certainly one angle to approach among many. And then lastly, we got Kirk. I saved Kirk for last because he has seen this one before. And all right, Kirk, having seen this film before, has it improved on the second viewing or third or whatever? First of all, what viewing is this for you? And has the movie appreciated over time, or has it depreciated, or where are you at with it now?
It's actually my 23rd viewing. My dad took me to opening night. He said, it was imperative. And then, do you have a spare FBI agent I might be able to talk to? I'm a little unnerved at the moment, but no, I don't know. It's tough, Tony. This viewing kind of left me wanting more conviction from the film, I would say. I feel like this is an R-rated film, correct? And it doesn't really feel like it. It feels like a kind of a very washed down R-rated film. Many people are killed, but we don't actually see them die, except for Bill Paxton when he has the axe, through the heart when Fenton kills his dad. The Bill Paxton character, I don't know. I think there could have been more risks taken. I think the main kind of selling point, the reason this film was made was because of its ending. I think it's overly clever to the point of being incoherent and jumbled and just, kind of a very pale pastiche of some greater thrillers that, we saw throughout the 90s. At the same time, I will say that if you kind of zoom away and look at the film from, a more distant perspective, and you don't focus on the granular details, you can find a little more enjoyment. You can see how harrowing this devolution into kind of delusion and religious fanaticism and a dogmatic understanding of Christianity can really affect kids. I like the idea of these kids actually being affected by what happened with their dad, not, being so well adjusted later in life. I think films kind of struggle with the idea of trauma and the idea of those formative experiences. So I think that's cool, and it does come full circle. It feels nostalgic, both in terms of the scene, the setting, and also the construction of the narrative, like with kind of the narration by Matthew McConaughey. It feels very much of its time. I don't think a movie like this would dare to be made in 2024. It's too conventional. And I don't think the ending carries enough weight to justify what is a very rote approach to filmmaking for the first 90 minutes. And I saw this movie before and I enjoyed it. So where's the disconnect, right? I'm not sure, actually. Maybe my tastes have changed. Maybe it's seen Matthew McConaughey in other roles and feeling like he's kind of stifled in this one. Paying a little bit more attention to the acting. I think the child actor Fenton had a very tough task ahead of him. And, it just felt a little overacted at times, but, he's a kid. Like, he's not going to be the best actor to ever grace the screen. So I can't really hold that against him. I do feel like Bill Paxton overacted a little as well, but maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't know. I think they could have gone more into the religious iconography. They could have, delved a little further into scripture and tying in various scriptures and passages. And, the only real kind of wink I noticed was that he was in the cellar for 7 days, right? And, that's kind of on the nose there. So, yeah, the movie, it's one I'm struggling with. It's somewhat enjoyable, definitely, but at the same time, I think it's a little lackluster in certain respects. So I am definitely open to being swayed by your opinion, Tony, and I really do think we should discuss the ending because I have some major questions about it, like as to whether or not Fenton was actually a serial killer himself, so they were both serial killers. but maybe you can explain that in your opening, Tony. I'm not sure, but yeah, give it your best shot, Tony. I'm not closing the door on this one just yet, even though it's overly negative.
All right. Stabbed in the back, betrayed. I feel like the hero of this film, Bill Paxton, when he's betrayed by his son Fenton at the end of the film, in a moment that's very tragic and that we're supposed to feel sad about as audience members. I hope you all interpreted that correctly, that Bill Paxton is the hero and his sons are the evil villains. Yeah, no, I think that, I'm hearing kind of some of the same sentiments from some of you. It's interesting, with Anthony and Connor, because Connor on the one hand says he was looking for something more kind of meditative, and then Anthony said almost he thought it would be more of a thriller. And I think what this movie does that's kind of a little bit unusual is it tries to kind of find that middle ground. And I think we can imagine a hypothetical version of this movie that is more of that slower paced, more naturalistic, more just sitting in the kind of the dynamics of this family situation interspersed with the brutality of the crime, and I think the movie doesn't quite go in that direction. The screenplay, which by the way is by a Brent Hanley, and this is I believe his only feature screenplay. It does feel kind of like a kind of a conventional thriller in certain ways, right down to the kind of twist ending. There's sort of the usual suspects feel to kind of how the movie is structured a little bit. But yeah, and I share some of your ambivalence about the movie. Is there a version of this movie I can imagine that maybe I would like better, or that would really kind of distill those elements, the creepy elements that I really respond to in this movie? Sure. But for better or worse, this is the movie that we have. And I'm glad that we have it in whatever form it exists, because I think that what it does in those flashback scenes is it tells an incredibly simple, really basic story, but I think it tells it with real conviction and strong performances. I think the two child actors do a pretty solid job, honestly. I thought they were pretty much up to the task. I think that the Alex, the younger brother, was believably kind of naive, and I think his innocence played well against really the brutality of what was going on for a very kind of unsettling effect. Like the moment where he comes to his dad and has his list written in crayon of people he wants them to murder, essentially. And his dad pats him on the back and says, "Oh, son, come on." Like he just got caught stealing batteries out of the drawer or something, or drawing in crayons on the neighbor's house. And I think that tone, I think, is very effective. I think there's numerous moments in this film that are showing in a way that I think is unique among horror films or among thrillers, and seeing the kids dealing with these situations. I think that a particularly powerful sequence is when kind of the inciting incident of the film, when Bill Paxton first kind of tells this story to his kids, and they have the car ride to school the next day, and the voiceover kind of tells us, "I thought it was just a dream. I'd hoped it was just a dream." And there's something very relatable about that idea of that I think most of us have had experiences where you want to believe that it was just a dream until something happens to kind of dispel that illusion. And then you're in that kind of inescapable reality where something has happened that you can't change, and that you're in this new reality. And I think that this movie dramatizes that quite well. As far as the boys, I can understand Connor wanting a version of the movie where, the boys are more ambivalent. Maybe that would be more in line with maybe our contemporary narrative sensibilities, or maybe that would be more of a more compelling film in certain ways. But I think with the ages of the kids, I think it makes sense. I think the family dynamic of this movie does ring true to me with where the ages are. I think to the older brother being the more skeptical one and the younger one just trying to please his dad. That feels very true to life. I think it's dramatized well, and I think the movie gets a lot of mileage out of that very simple dynamic. And again, is it the most complicated? Is it the most nuanced portrayal of this? Not necessarily. I think it's pretty simple. It's pretty by the numbers, but I think it dramatizes it very well. And I think that I'm with the movie for almost all of it. And I think too, does it strain our belief that Fenton wouldn't be able to get out of the situation? He wouldn't be able to tell someone. I mean, maybe, but I think also that when you're in that situation, you feel trapped. It's your dad and it's your little brother, and you don't know what he's capable of. And to me, like that all felt like pretty true. Like it felt pretty like convincing to me and relatable in certain way. I don't want to say relatable. Like my dad was just like the no, but like, but I mean, I could relate to the characters and I could understand why they would respond in the way that they did. And I think the movie is successful in kind of throwing up that contrast between the innocence and the horror regularly. Just like little moments where between the dynamics between the brothers that just remind us that they're just little boys. They're just ordinary kids. Or like when Fenton's digging the hole and he's fighting with his brother and he says butthole, just like, and they just like murdered several people, and it's just sort of this unsettling moment that kind of reminds you about like what we're seeing. Because I think that this movie immerses you in that world it creates and in that dynamic of the characters where you're seeing things essentially from the boy's perspective, so that when you get those kind of reminders of what's really going on, I think it's very powerful and unsettling. Or the fact, like, for instance, when the dad comes home with a person in a sack over his shoulder. I don't know. To me, there is some shock value there. When they talk about angels and they talk about demons and they talk about the list, that's one thing. But I think when you actually see them bringing a person into a shed that he kidnaps in a van, I don't know. To me, like I get like a jolt. I get like a shock of like Jesus Christ, where you're kind of taken out of that perspective for just a second and brought back into kind of reality. And I think the creepiest scene in the movie, maybe my favorite scene, was the conflict between Fenton and his father begins to escalate, and Bill Paxton basically makes kind of an implicit threat to his son, where he basically says, kind of through tears, like, "I had this vision, and the angel told me something," and he says, "What did he tell you?" And he said, "I don't even want to say it. It's so horrible." Basically, implicitly threatening that to kill his son because he himself is a demon, right? And I think that scene's actually kind of undermined a little later when he says, "The angel told me you were a demon," because I think that was pretty clear from the context what they were talking about. I'm trying to undermine some of the creepiness of that moment. But anyway, I think that those elements in that flashback story, I think, are very dramatically successful. I think it's a very kind of compelling exploration of this sort of fanaticism and kind of moral absolutism and the effects that has on a developing mind, and how that and it's very focused on just on the family. There's we can imagine something that has more kind of social implications, or how does this what are the ramifications with other aspects of society. And this is not that movie, for better or worse, but I think it works well. I think my ambivalence about the movie comes in more with the frame narrative and the ending, which when I first saw this movie, I outright did not like. But on this watch, I think I've kind of come to terms with it a little bit more. But maybe that's a topic that can wait. I think that what I think we should just open it up and see if there's any particular topics that you guys would like to discuss. I know Anthony talked about the maleness of the movie. I think that's something that potentially is fruitful there, because it is an extremely male movie. And I don't know if you wanted to maybe elaborate a little, Anthony, or talk a little bit about kind of what your take on that was. If you thought that was more like an intentional choice or more of an incidental choice, or what do you think? What do you think that does to us as the audience? Like, how does that affect how we experience this story?
There's a lot of thinking, I think, that needs to be done around those sort of set of questions, because they're essential to not just understanding our experience and our reaction, but also what the movie wants to do. I mean, obviously this was set up this way by Bill Paxton, giving what you described, Tony, as probably a pretty average script and trying to elevate it a bit more, it seems like, as a director and as an actor, putting himself on the screen. I'd say one thing, and this relates to kind of external like relation, is it's really fascinating to watch this movie in hindsight of where Matthew McConaughey's career would have gone, because I imagine that would especially taint or enhance our experience of the movie. Because if we watched this when it came out, he was still kind of an up and comer, post Dazed and Confused, pre-romantic comedy era. But we're now watching this in the post, True Detective moment. And I just finished rewatching that series. So I'm thinking of Matthew McConaughey as a dramatic actor. And so I didn't know that twist was coming, I should say. But I had a feeling that Matthew McConaughey would have a little bit more of a punch, have a bit more of a moment. And all that's to say is the movie's twist, I guess, serves as giving us a kind of an extra dimension of like what happens if this religious nightmare becomes kind of our reality. And it goes back to this idea of maleness because I keep thinking of these moments of sacrifice in the Bible, some of which are discussed in the film. Abraham and Isaac sort of moment, the kind of gift of sacrifice as the ultimate gift that God is supposed to give us, right? Sorry, I'm kind of rambling. And I'm trying to make sense of this connection because there's a really deep and interesting moment in the film in which I think the dad discusses how there's a moment in which God tells, what's his name, to sacrifice his son. And he's just about to, only for God to stop it. And this is like a moment that's like endlessly fascinated, religious scholars and philosophers of like, what does it mean to go forward with this? And what if God had actually not stopped it? And I'm trying to make sense of all these kind of stories in relation to the film because I want the film to have a bit more of a message that maybe is there. And maybe I'm just not yet fully thinking about where I want to go with it. So maybe you need to come back to me, Tony. Sorry.
No, it's all right. And again, I don't know that the movie has like necessarily figured this all out. And I think too, like for me, sometimes I don't need that. I think it's more fun to sometimes just play with certain ideas or explore certain ideas. We talk about that in the context of like some of Paul Schrader's movies, which actually like this movie has sort of a connection to Mishima for me, where I've always been drawn to stories about people who are pushed to extremes or people who take their own beliefs very seriously and take them to their logical conclusions. And it's like a lot of religions are, like this in the sense that if you take them literally and you take them at their word, you're going to end up in a place that is kind of incompatible with a lot of 21st century liberal values, right? And this is a movie kind of dramatizing that, but I'm ambivalent about whether is this a straightforwardly, atheist film or anti-religious film. It feels that way to me, but that also feels a bit reductive. It's more, I think, about exploring just like where the ideas can lead, particularly with like, the young and like, what does it mean to kind of inculcate a young person with these like very powerful kind of uncompromising ideas that really brook no negotiation. And I think that like, to bring it back around to kind of that maleness, there is, I think you can broaden that to sort of, patriarchal family structure, right? Or like there is the authority, there is the man, there is the father, and I forget where I read it. It was in some novel, but it was a good quote. It was like basically like our father is our model for God, or like what as a child, like that's what you picture God as, is whatever your father was like. And I think this movie's kind of about that idea and like, how does that inform our worldview? How does our upbringing inform our worldview? Not just in terms of philosophical, moral, religious ideas, but in terms of just our family structure and our family dynamics, and how do those two things relate? And again, I don't know that the movie necessarily, set out to do that and explored it, to a defined thesis. It's more just in that kind of sandbox. But I do think it is interesting, though, that the absence of women in this story and the appearance of a woman at the very end of the movie, I think that with the twist and with everything we know about these characters by the end, there's sort of an open question as to what did happen with the mother. I think that it's, not at all out of the question to think that maybe she did not die in childbirth, as we're led to believe. Maybe that's just a story he told his kids. Maybe there's some far more sinister outcome here. And then the appearance of the secretary, who it turns out to be McConaughey's wife at the end of the movie. I guess it doesn't say it's his wife; it's implied to be his wife. Is pregnant with his child, meaning essentially that the cycle continues, and we don't know what's going to happen to her, but probably nothing good, regardless. Yeah, and I think the fact that he's a sheriff as well is furthering that idea of authority and corrupt authority, and so again, I don't know if I'm being super coherent here or tying all these things together, but these are kind of the concepts the movie is playing with. It's about, being subject to authority what it means to be subject to authority, how we respond to that authority when we question it. So that's where we're at. And I think the movie can't kind of come to a conclusion on these issues because, when you're talking about religion, none of us know what the real religion is. So I don't know. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts, Kirk, on any of those ideas?
Did come to a conclusion, though. It basically validated the existence of demons and said that Matthew McConaughey is some sort of channel through which God is speaking or directing acts on earth. Did I miss that? It very
No,
much.
I'm sorry. You're correct. You're correct. At the end of maybe this would be a good excuse to talk about kind of the insanity of the last 20 or so minutes of this movie and just kind of untangling that
It's
mess.
so messy. It's so messy.
It is very messy, but yes.
Because I mean, we learned that he's actually Alex and not Fenton. We learned that Fenton is
the God
also a serial killer.
Yes.
But
yes, he is
Fenton
in fact a serial killer.
Okay, so Fenton came up on his list. God came to Alex in a vision and said, kill Fenton. Apparently Fenton was trying to lure Alex back into his life to kill him by committing the God's Hand murders. Do you remember that little quote? He said, oh, I think Fenton was doing it just to draw me in. And then he goes and kills him. And then he puts, it's in a very confusing way. He puts the list crossing off the FBI agent's name in Fenton's apartment. And I think the whole purpose of it is the whole purpose of visiting the FBI in Dallas is basically because he needs to kill that person. But why does he need to even, I don't know why he even needs to bring his brother into it to begin with. Why does he need to make the police think that his brother's still alive? I'm not really sure. It gets lost. It loses me a little bit. And then on top of it, then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, demons are real. All these people, the FBI agent killed his mom. And, I thought an interesting touch was going to be that. What?
No, I'm laughing at that particular twist that the FBI agent did in fact kill his mom. I think that's kind of the most ridiculous part of it all, but go ahead.
What's his name? The old guy in the car is like actually, he diddles kids, and that was kind of a strange twist too. I don't know. It's very dark, right? It's very kind of somber and sordid and just a weird ending, but I feel like I was more confused than moved. And I think when it happens that way, when movies get into that issue, when they suffer from that kind of construction, I think it does the film itself a disservice. I think they could have, had one of these 3 or 4 twists happen.
Yeah.
And then they could have added a 10-minute conversation between Fenton and his dad about his mom and how she died. Like, there wasn't enough character development, on top of the fact that I feel like, as you guys have been talking, Fenton is basically an adult in a kid's body. Tell me one time Fenton acts like a child, except for not going to tell the police on like 1 or 2 occasions, which even adults would, maybe struggle with and certainly have in real life, like, reporting parents or reporting loved ones for crimes. He's always so rational. He's always so convicted. He digs a fucking 15-foot hole for his dad.
Haven't you seen the movie Holes, Kirk?
Yeah. I don't know. I have seen it. But I'm just thinking, like, through the whole thing, his dad is almost submissive in a way, and Fenton's the dominant one. It's like Fenton's raising his dad and his little brother. And I feel like this movie just strays further and further away from something that would feel more affecting if, these kids lived in actual fear of their dad, which I feel like Fenton says he's afraid of his dad, but you don't really see that. He goes into the shed and closes the door. And of course, the actor probably got some notes like, start shaking. He's like, are you afraid of me? And he nods his head. But if you're really afraid, you're in a shed by yourself with your dad with an axe, and your dad has killed people with that axe in that same shed. Why the fuck are you going in there to begin with? Run away. I don't know. I just and then people say, well, that's him being a kid, but he wasn't a kid at other times. Anyways, I've fulfilled my quota on Kirk rants. I think we were originally talking about the ending, and I feel like it's convoluted. I wonder how Connor feels about the ending in general.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm totally with you, Kirk. I was hoping to bring that up myself. Didn't even get the whole thing about Fenton really being the circle. That was confusing to me. I mean, I get now, obviously that makes sense. I kind of just passed me by as I was watching. But the really offensive part, and it's so unnecessary, you can take out one line. I mean, this one line kind of makes the whole thing tumble down, which is the FBI agent saying, "How did you know?" as he's being killed for being not a demon. I mean, apparently a demon is just someone who has done something bad.
Right. They kind of conflate sinner and demon. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a little weird. But like, so like because he killed his mom, he's like, "How did you know?" Like if you just didn't have that, then you could explain it as being now Matthew McConaughey Adam is seeing what he thinks is a vision,
right,
as the father did, right? The father is deluded, obviously, right? So that, but then that kind of makes you retrospectively call into the question the whole idea that, oh, well, like actually in this world, the father was definitely having those visions. So yes, God actually does have like a kill list. And how does he get the names? That's another thing. Like, how does he like? I mean, you would think you really would just like look in the phone book or something, or but like, or there'd be some element of opportunity there. But no, apparently, just God just actually does give him the name. So that raises a lot of questions. I think we have to almost watch the movie as if that line wasn't in it.
All that's missing is a shot of the father and son giving each other high fives and God like giving a thumbs up to Matthew McConaughey as he's killing the guy.
Yeah. But maybe that's the most edgy atheist thing. That God exists and he sucks. He's bad, like God is evil, maybe that is the most edgy atheist take there is, and then yeah, there's a lot to say. I mean, I just to address a little bit of what Tony was saying about like the fathers and sons theme. I mean, it is interesting, and I think there's a little bit of missed opportunity that yes, there's parallels to like all the crazy stuff that is in the Bible, and the Bible is full of like incredibly violent, kind of horrible things. I think that obviously has been remarked upon a lot, but maybe not quite enough. I don't know. But there's also the fact too that like these kinds of stories have happened a lot in the United States in particular. There have been a lot of like small sects that are very like extremely very fundamentalist that sometimes doesn't get to this level of like sort of serial killing, but there are people who like many killers, even like revolutionaries, John Brown, Nat Turner, right, were kind of inspired by God, and they kind of had a sect of followers around them, sometimes often their children. So like this is the thing that like kind of is reflecting something that's kind of real in like the American, society, and I think there wasn't really an effort to like to make any kind of comment on that. I mean, maybe there's something. I think it's an interesting thing to portray, I think, at all. I think that itself is kind of worthwhile, but I think it doesn't really go out of its way to analyze that, except for the fact that I think, and as what Anthony was kind of getting at, it's like, obviously this is like a nightmare version of a dad, right? It's a nightmare version. In some ways, he's a very supportive father, and he says, "Oh, like take it easy there, Tiger," when they're like plotting to kill someone. So it's this like dark, twisted version of like the American dad figure, the supportive dad, even the dad who is, because you could have played him. He could have been an abusive father. He could have been, but no, he's otherwise an extremely loving father. So maybe there's something to that of like kind of like calling into question the whole idea of this like patriarch, this American patriarch kind of figure. But I don't think like I still think at the same time it didn't necessarily get it with the reality of what that looks like. Historically has looked like and still does look like in some families, where the father's kind of has a tyrannical presence and stuff like that. So I don't know. I thought it's a little muddled on that, but I do think there's something to that it's definitely trying to do something, and kind of not in sending up as if it's a parody, but in twisting or calling into question the kind of the cozy kind of American father sitcom dad kind of archetype. But yeah.
Yeah, I do like that about Paxton's performance here. I don't think he overacts personally. I think that it almost feels like a performance of fatherhood. Like this is what he thinks a dad is supposed to kind of do.
Do you think Bill Paxton was a good performance?
Do you think it's a good performance? Oh, you're asking Connor.
I liked his performance. Yeah, I thought it was good.
Do you not think he gives a good performance, Kirk?
No, I don't really particularly think he's a good actor, even.
Yeah, I thought he was good in this.
I did. I think he's legitimately creepy. I find him very good. Yeah.
I don't find him threatening at all.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think okay, so let's talk about the ending a little bit, because I largely agree with a lot of the and for the record, I guess there was a bit of a tangent there about oh man, what's his name? The older boy? Kenton? Fenton. He's mature, certainly, but I think that I don't know, you see him like goofing around with his brother, you see him get kind of pissy, you see him with his friend, you see him running around. I don't know. I think he feels like a kid to me. I think there are he's probably in like junior high school. I feel like there are kids like that. I don't know. I didn't find it like I certainly didn't think he was like, oh, this is like an adult in the kid's body. I didn't feel that way. I think he was still believable as a kid of that age, and I feel like when I was, that age, I was kind of like questioning my parents and things like that. And I don't know, it felt like
oh, you would totally save the day, huh, Tony?
I would have saved the day.
You would totally
digging holes. You dug your in-ground pool.
I would have dug a bigger hole than that shit. I'll tell you that hole sucked. Shia LaBeouf could have taught him a thing or two, let me tell you. But yeah, the ending on that note, I think is worth discussing. I mean, we've discussed it a bit already. I obviously want Anthony to chime in as well. But and then maybe we'll move on to the vote. Yeah, I largely agree with a lot of these criticisms. I think it's just too much. It tries to throw too much at you. And I think that there's a version of that could have worked where they go through just the society ending, where it's just absolute batshit insanity, but it doesn't quite hit that fever pitch in the way it would need to land on that level. So the ending just feels really jumbled, really confused. The twist that Matthew McConaughey is in fact Alex, not Fenton, feels very empty because 90% of the movie has been in the flashback, which focuses on just three characters. And it's like, hey, you know how I thought I was one of the brothers? I was actually the other brother all along. And it's like, okay, like that doesn't mean it. Like that means nothing. Like that doesn't really have any narrative value or emotional value to me. I do like about the ending the fact that our narrator character is a psychotic killer all along, the fact that he is in fact a sheriff, the fact that this religious mania may in fact have more truth to it than we're led to believe. I like all that stuff, although I think I like it more on paper than in terms of execution. I think that the ending would go down a lot smoother if it were a bit more ambiguous about how true these convictions are. If we just kept it at, like, for example, there's security footage and it seems to like blur out McConaughey's face, and then there was the man who spoke with him briefly earlier in the film, can't remember what he looked like. I think those details are fine, but I think they could have left it there. I'm also not a fan of the flashback showing the crimes of the people they're killing. Especially the fact that the FBI agent supposedly killed his elderly mom. I think that's just so ridiculous and over the top. It comes across as very goofy, at least to me. So I think that the ending, it felt like they were trying to do too much. It felt like they were trying to do a Usual Suspects. They're trying to blow your mind, and I think they did not quite do it well. I think there are some good ideas in there, and I like the idea of what I like most about the idea of the ending, at least, is the idea that it puts us kind of in the shoes of one of the kids, where all of our kind of assumptions about the world are kind of thrown away, where we actually don't really understand what's going on, and we may in fact be at the mercy of a God who may be hostile to what humans typically would value. Something like that. I think that is interesting and potentially disturbing. I don't think they quite nailed it tonally or dramatically, though. But I'll pass it to Anthony. What did you think of the ending? Were there aspects of it you responded to, or did you think it was just a big old mess?
Well, wouldn't thematically and like powerfully, wouldn't it make more sense for this like twist, not for him to be the other brother this whole time, but for him to have simply been like who we thought he was the whole time, the kind of disbelieving brother, and then for that moment, for the twist to be that he converted, or that he all of a sudden now realizes that the mission was like true the whole time, and then we could have let everything else been the same. it would have kind of, I thought, lent a kind of even creepier power to what is essentially divine justice without like morality attached. As in, do all these people deserve what they get coming to them? It seems kind of powerful. It seems kind of evil at times, and it almost seems excessive. Like, to what degree do they do something that necessitates it? I suppose for some of them, of course, the crimes are truly horrific, but I'm thinking of the woman. Like, we don't know the story of what's happening next to her. We're taking this all at face granted, that the mission and what she delivers is kind of like a single man in that film, in which any sort of punishment is just the worst punishment you could imagine.
Yeah, there are shades of the movie. Have you guys seen the movie Super with Rainn Wilson? It came out right around the time of Kick-Ass, and it's kind of like a take on the taxi driver, like the vigilante superhero with no powers. Very funny, dark comedy. There are parts of it that remind me of that, especially when he uses a wrench as his instrument of vengeance. So when they reveal the aluminum tube, that did make me laugh a bit. But that's one of their magical weapons. But yeah, no, I agree, Anthony. I think that the idea that McConaughey converted would have probably been a more creepy ending, and I think would have accomplished the same thing they were going for. There'd been a lot less kind of convoluted. So I think I know where this is going. I feel like this has been a fairly negative episode for a movie that I do in fact like and would recommend to people if you have not seen it. I think it is still a very effective and creepy film, and it's very interesting. So we can transition now to the votes. As I said, I have a feeling I know which way the wind is falling here. I'm going to start with Anthony this time.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it, Tony. I thought it was an interesting pick, and there was something substantial everyone was able to, like, extract out of it for discussion, and kind of an interesting throwback slash interesting kind of moment in time when this could have been made as like a mainstream actor's directorial debut. But I got to say, no, I wasn't quite convinced by it, and I think the more people talked, the more of the negatives came out.
Okay, I think that's fair. And then Connor, you bring the axe down. It's all right.
Sure.
The head's in the chopping block.
But first, before I have the axe, I'm holding it aloft, but I just want to note one thing, that Anthony has propounded the theory that maybe when you have the demon moments, you touch the person, have the demon moment, you see a vision, but Anthony points out the interesting idea that maybe that's all they see. All they see is a little like glimpse. So maybe it's a little bit of like a That's So Raven situation where they don't see the entire thing. Like, there could have been any number of things while she was sitting next to a man with a slit throat, or why the guy was dragging the girl into the car, that kind of thing. I would love.
I'm sure he had a good reason. Okay, I'm sure there's.
It becomes interesting as it's sort of its own whole premise, and I would love to watch that movie. This movie, it is interesting. I mean, like, I don't quite see it. I think there's element. It's really interesting also to read like Ebert's review of it. I think Ebert's review, really fixates on some of those things, and also makes a lot of like cultural arguments. Like, he goes into a lot of things and comparing it to actual real cases and stuff like that. It's a little bit all over the place, but there's something interesting about this movie. It connects to things, but I think even just for that, just for how did you know, I feel like I can't give it a yes. It so defeats kind of the purpose. And beyond that, I mean, I just think it didn't get a huge rise out of me even while I was watching. I think there were moments where I was thrilled. I did enjoy Paxton's performance. I'm going to defend Paxton against Kirk's snide remarks. But beyond that, I don't think I can give it a yes. I'm going to give it a no. Sorry.
Okay.
So
That's fine. I'm now dead. I've been killed. I however want to see the That's So Raven reboot. I'm kind of along these lines. I think that will be pretty good. All right, Kirk. I'm dead. If you want to take a shit on my neck hole, defile my corpse, that's fine. Or if you want to do a meaningless yes vote, that's also welcome.
I've picked up your decapitated head. You're blinking still, as were the instructions to see how long you would have consciousness. So in these last few moments, I think the only way I could say yes is if Alex Meeks moves to Louisiana, goes into the academy for the state police academy, and changes his name to Rustin Cole. And he subsequently becomes a staunch atheist and teams up with Woody Harrelson to track down, some fanatics who are committing crimes in the bayou. It could work. It could work. The guy, the FBI agent says he has, some instincts of a police officer. So I don't know. That tie-in might save it, but other than that, this film just suffers from the road to perdition disease, where basically it's not convicted of anything, and therefore I don't know who this movie is even made for. Like, tell me one person whose favorite movie is Frailty, and I'd really just love to talk to them. Have just learn more about them. Just like, who are they? And the fact that I don't really know, I can't even envision that person. It could be like a 67-year-old housewife in Wichita, Kansas, or it could be some hipster in Williamsburg. I'm just unsure. So this movie just left me cold the second viewing. I think the first viewing I was definitely in a different place in terms of how I appreciate and consume film, and so that's okay. I think it was fun to talk about and to see some aspects of it and see people that do like to kind of create a certain ambiance and commit to that throughout a whole film. So anyways, it's a no from me. Sorry, Tony. 0-3.
All right, that's all right. I was swept. I got swept. It happens to the best of us and the worst, but I'm not gonna go there. All right. It's time for the fan favorite section. Cue the music. All right, that was the music. All right, so now these three will pitch a movie to me for us to watch next time, and I'm trying to think who was least recent. Does anyone know?
Might be me. I'm not sure.
I'll get you we'll cut out the dead air. It is you. Sicario, 96. That was your last.
Okay, so I guess since I've gone least recently, I get to decide the order. I'll go last. Let Connor go second. So I guess Anthony, you'll go first.
Okay.
And real quick, let's say the Kirk rule that we instituted in episode 50, which I'm assuming we're still doing. If one person nominates a movie from a given decade, that decade is then eliminated for the rest of the nomination. So if Anthony pitches a movie from the 90s, no one else can pitch a movie from the 90s, and so on. Go ahead, Anthony.
All right, so I'll be pitching something from the 1970s then, 1972 to be exact. This is a film I normally wouldn't pitch for someone like Tony. Normally I maybe would try to kind of pitch something to his taste, but I'm going to go with the opposite of what we just watched. And I'm going to pitch Peter Bogdanovich's What's Up, Doc, which is a screwball comedy starring Ryan O'Neal and what can't I think of her name? Barbara Streisand. But it's a kind of a farcical look at this kind of character professor who's on his way to San Francisco to kind of argue for a grant. And in true screwball fashion, kind of hilarity ensues. It has almost like a Looney Tunes kind of wackiness to it. It's a funny movie. It's a gag movie, and it's a type of genre that we normally don't cover, which is the romantic comedy at its heart. So that's kind of my pitch. What's Up, Doc?
All right, very good. And that was Connor, correct?
That is right. Well, mine is going to be, I mentioned this to you, Tony, pretty recently, but I believe, according to my notes, that I recommended this movie before, but after watching Yorgos Lanthimos's Poor Things, I was interested in returning to my favorite movie of his, which was kind of his first very major critically acclaimed one, and that is Dogtooth. So this is a Greek language 2009 film, which also I kind of spoke to me because it has a little bit, it does a little bit of what this movie, of what Frailty does, in that it does kind of send up. I mean, send up is the only word I'm thinking of. I mean, it brutally reflects in a sort of grotesque way the tyranny of the nuclear family. It obviously is, what you're seeing is a very screwed up, sort of premise, a screwed up situation, a screwed up kind of family life that is also disturbing. I think portraying kind of the extent to which we can be affected by our upbringing, the extent to which we are kind of a tabula rasa at the mercy of our environment. It's a very, very cool, very interesting movie. It has these incredibly dark in its comic qualities. But it has some of his hallmarks that you still see in his more recent movies. But I think it's very direct, it's very powerful, quite disturbing. It's definitely a Tony movie in that respect. Tony has seen it, so we'll see if he goes for it this time. But I would love to watch it with the whole podcast and to discuss 2009 Yorgos Lanthimos Dogtooth.
All right, very good. And then Kirk, why don't you bring us in? What do you got for us this time?
All right, I am going to harken back to a movie that I think was one of my favorites of 2022. It's called Girl Picture. It's from Finland. Director Ali Hepasalo and starring Amu Milanov and Elunura Kauhanen. So if you know those folks, good for you. But no, it's kind of a really, really fascinating look at the lives of three adolescent / young adult women who are all in very different places, but it's an intimate look, I think, into the lives of these women as they navigate the various pressures, the external, the internal kind of expectations. And then on top of that, there's a budding romance that's quite unlikely. And I just think the movie really is a breath of fresh air. Look at what we just watched, Frailty, just a male-dominated film. This is a very feminine film, and I appreciate it for that. I think we need more of that on this podcast. I think we need more stories, unconventional romance stories, and yeah, just it's like a coming of age, but mixed with a really cutesy romance with some somewhat somber moments of family strife. And I would love to get your opinions on it. So that's my choice.
All right, very good. And just to say for the record, I have seen Dogtooth, as Connor said. I have not seen What's Up, Doc. And I actually did watch Girl Picture on Kirk's recommendation at some point last year, maybe 3-4 months ago. All right, let's get some butts. Let's get some buttles. Let's go.
All right, that's interesting because I feel like those few times when all the pitches seem to line up with something that you've seen, or it's very rare that it's just one. I don't know if I've ever had it where it's just my film that you haven't seen. Now I would say, as opposed to Dogtooth, which is probably obviously the most Tony picture of the three, I think it's curious that Kirk and I are trying to switch things up with kind of romantic angled films, or at least films that kind of feature that as a storyline. I would say for What's Up, Doc from 1972, there's something kind of interesting just as a backstory. Peter Bogdanovich is kind of a legendary filmmaker of this time. And this is kind of one of his favorites that he ever makes. I would say it's the perfect distillation of his style, his humor, which is a throwback to the Barbara Stanwyck kind of days of Hollywood. And it also kind of has something that we haven't really seen, I think, since maybe When Harry Met Sally on this podcast. I'm trying to think if we've ever done any other rom-coms. But I would say it kind of has a kind of more zany precursor to like an Annie Hall. So I think if you haven't seen it, or if you're not too aware of Bogdanovich, this is the perfect access point. And great leads, great humor, at least to me, a very Looney Tunes, Acme Productions sort of approach to the comedy.
It sounds really interesting. I mean, I can't knock Anthony's. It's definitely in my ear. As you know, I love the early 70s. And the fact that now he's tying it back to the old Hollywood kind of comedies and writing, I mean, that makes it sound even more appealing, to be honest. Does sound great. Girl Picture, I can't argue with anything that Kirk says. I guess all I can do is make the case for Dogtooth, which, well, Tony, you've already seen it. I guess you can decide whether you're in the mood to watch it or not. I wonder if I'll like it as much watching it this time. I haven't watched it. I probably watched it maybe like 2 years ago, something like that. It's been a little while for me. I just do think it's something that will really sit with us. There'll be a lot to discuss. Will there be as much to discuss as there is? I mean, I think, I'm curious to see. I've definitely enjoyed watching it multiple times. But I think it's worth checking to see what it will be like for those who haven't seen it before, and what kind of reactions we'll get out of it, what kind of things we can discuss. I just think it could be a very interesting choice, but I get that it's very different from the other two. So,
Well, this is one of the occasions where wouldn't mind. I'd probably invite watching any of these films. Both your choices, Anthony and Connor, seem very intriguing. I haven't seen either, but I hear your merits, the merits you're kind of propounding, and they make sense to me. And as for mine, I didn't know you had seen it, Tony. That kind of, I don't know, that makes me uncertain one way or another. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I don't have that initial curiosity to kind of boost me anymore on your end, but I guess what I would say is I think we could have some really interesting conversations about worlds that are so foreign to us. And, just there's not, I would say I'm always kind of drawn in by stories that are from like a contemporary female perspective, because I think it's so easy for us to really forget what it might feel like to be a woman in this day and age, and especially a queer woman. I think there's just, I'm not trying to like go down the social justice angle, though I will have you cancel if you don't choose this, Tony. But I think there's really some room for conversation, right? Like, what can we learn? What can we extract from this film that maybe gives us a different idea of where we are in the world, and kind of how we're situated. But also, I think the film is well done. It's kind of whimsical. There's some really cute touches. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, there's some artistic decisions or directorial decisions that are, nice little flourishes. The soundtrack is pretty good. It has a little like tint of 80s nostalgia injected in there, which might just be a reflection of Finnish culture and where they are. I'm not really sure. I think that adds another layer. Seeing a country that's not England, that's not France, but is in the Western world, it's just not one we often see. Tell me if you've seen another movie that takes place in Helsinki. I'd love to hear about it. But yeah, I don't know. It's probably for the same reasons I was drawn to a movie like The Hunt, or Another Round, which show a Scandinavian country. I'm also drawn to Girl Picture. But Tony, I don't think you can go wrong here. So swing away.
I'm sure I'll find a way. All right. I will say I actually really liked Girl Picture. I'll keep you out of suspense. I think it's a very good coming of age movie, good cinematography, good performances, very charming. I would heartily recommend it to the others. What's Up, Doc? It's not ringing my bell. I'm sorry. It's just I'm trying to be open-minded, but I just want to watch Dogtooth. I just saw Poor Things. I do want to go back to. I do love me some Yorgos. I do love some Greek Yorgos. And Killing of a Sacred Deer was one of my favorite movies of the past decade. That's still my favorite one, but I think there's something to be said for going back to the original, the real raw, real simple, real pure, black, dark, funny Yorgos territory that is present in Dogtooth. And I think it's a very discussable movie. It's very castable. So that one is going to be my pick for this week.
Well, I'm glad. So it seems like it'll be a good one. And Greece is also in the Western world, Kirk. So,
Typical ignorance, bigotry, racism.
I was talking about countries that weren't broke, though, in the Western world. No, I just, I have to say, feeling, yesterday was the 6th of January, as you know, and starting to feel a little suspicious on my end here. Let's just say, if Mike Pence does the right thing, the next time you hear from us, I'll be the host.
Okay, sounds good. You hear that? I know Mike Pence is a big fan of ours. He's listened to every episode. So you heard it, bud. I don't know what that means.
He's going to overturn the vote.
He's going to overturn the vote. He's going to make us watch Girl Picture. I don't know if that would be his bag. per se, but yeah, we'll see. We'll
It's the
see.
meddle with one of the ones you can get your movie into the 706. You're like, that would be the one to meddle with versus
No.
meddling with the selection of a movie. But
That's true.
gonna,
That's true.
we're gonna pull the Mike Pence string if we call
This is the
Pence.
nomination. This is like the Republican nomination.
You know how? Yeah,
The vote would be the election, the general election. Yeah,
it's very serious. We're considering running for political office. We'll be the no labels equivalent, the 706ers. You know, oddly charming and somewhat antisocial group.
That's a good campaign slogan. And write me in. I always tell people, write me in.
Let's all be president together. That'd be cool. President
is that allowed? We should try to make that a thing. Yeah,
pretend like conjoined or something. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah. Write us all in on the one line. Try to squeeze us in there.
Okay. Yeah.
Take us out.
I'll have what she's having.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Welcome to the bonus bit. We're going to do a little bit of an extra treat for you guys today. We are in January of 2024, and sometimes we like to look back on the last year in film and do a little bit of a recap and just say what we liked, whether it's a number one or a top 5 or a top 10, whatever we got ready, whatever we're ready to share. That's fine. So I think Anthony, why don't we start with Anthony? I think you said you had a film you wanted to kind of shout out or praise here. What was that film? Or top, whatever you have ready.
Okay, well, I gotta say is I'm catching up on a lot of 2023 movies all of a sudden. I'm finally saw Barbie. I'm gonna watch The Holdovers tonight. Still need to see Poor Things, but I'm catching up. But without a doubt, I know Tony didn't care for this movie, or I feel like it's a type of movie Tony wouldn't care for. But I gotta say, it's very hard for me to imagine any film would top this, which is the new Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron, which I absolutely loved. And I just saw in theaters recently, and it blew me away. Every shot I wanted on a postcard, every ounce of dialogue had my heart breaking in half. And by the end of the film, I was just devastated in the proper way. It was the type of film I wanted as a kid, and the type of film I would love to show a kid of mine one day. The Boy and the Heron, absolutely favorite.
All right. Good choice. And yes, I did not particularly care for The Boy and the Heron. I found myself a little bit bewildered by it. And, that's all right. I don't think it was bad. I don't think it was bad. Okay.
There's no frailty.
Relax.
Okay?
Relax. It's no frailty. There's no flashback of the cop killing his mom. They've thrown that in where the little boy kills his mom in the flashback. Maybe I don't know. But no, that's definitely a respectable pick. That feels like a very Anthony pick. And, a lot of people are really digging it, so that's all. It's all good. It's not a Birdman situation. All right, Kirk, what do you got for us? Do you have a film? Do you have a number film? What do you got?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to say, Anthony, I didn't take you for somebody who likes when kids do hardcore drugs, but The Boy and the Heroine sounds good too. I just think there's a little bit, it's like, who's your audience in that scenario? But anyways, I have to be very straightforward. I did not watch many 2023 movies. In fact, if I'm calculating correctly, I only saw one, which is, I know it's a shock. I was watching movies that were older, and it was kind of a purposeful decision. Every year we're on this treadmill, and I kind of wanted to fill in some of the cracks in some of the decades that really I neglected in my 20s, like the 70s and 80s, even the 90s. So yeah, I the only 2023 film I think I saw was Oppenheimer. I may be mistaken and saw some other ones. I'm going to see The Holdovers definitely, and Poor Things. So I can't really comment on those. And Oppenheimer was, I don't know. It's probably, Tony, I think it's like one of your favorite movies of all time. I was left cold by it. I didn't think it, I think the pacing was off. I think it was a lot of dialogue with not much substance. I think the idea was to overwhelm the audience with all the dialogue, all the exposition, at the expense of some really poignant character development, which could have happened but didn't. Christopher Nolan, I don't know, his last two films have kind of suffered this fate for me, where I feel like he sacrifices some of the elements that really made him special in his earlier works, some of that like poignancy and that eye from the audience, that the eye that every moviegoer possesses. You just watch something like Tenet and it feels so disconnected from what somebody might enjoy, or how they might understand it. And Oppenheimer just, we have the test out in the desert, and then we have this whole Robert Downey Jr., I forget the name of the actual person. The second half of the movie is just basically Cillian Murphy or Oppenheimer, trying not to get his security clearance revoked and being accused of being, associating with communists. I don't really know what that was meant to instill in me. We're talking about the fucking atomic bomb. Why do we have to get into like a bureaucratic pig wrestling match with some of these bureaucrats? And then Rami Malek just randomly shows up for 10 seconds. I don't know. I know I'm going long, but if somebody could really explain to me why that last hour or 70 minutes of Oppenheimer played out the way it did, I would love to hear a cogent explanation. Anyways, good subjective, experience for me of viewing movies in 2023, not necessarily enjoying films from that year, but also enjoying what I was watching. So I'll take that. I'm comfortable with that. But I'll pass it.
All right. That's all right, Kirk. It's okay. We'll get to that. And then Connor, and what about you? Did you have a special? And first of all, I will say, for the record, Kirk did say on the podcast his favorite movie of 2023 was Oppenheimer, just by default. So that is his pick. So we got Boy and the Heron, Oppenheimer, and now Connor. You weigh in. Tell us here. What do you got?
Okay, well, I've seen most of the movies in question. I have not yet seen Boy and the Heron, Heroine either. But yeah, for me, the favorite movie that I watched in theaters in 2023 was Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder in 3D. Obviously, that does not count as a 2023 movie, but that was my favorite movie-going experience. I was underwhelmed. Maybe it's my contrarian, sort of attitude coming out. I was pretty underwhelmed with both Barbie and Oppenheimer. For all the reasons that Kirk mentioned, I did not like Oppenheimer, and many other reasons as well. Barbie, I thought, was disappointing in a lot of ways, and Poor Things, it didn't necessarily blow me away. It was cool, but it kind of didn't really stack up with some other Yorgos movies, as maybe we'll discuss in the next episode. For me, though, easily the best, the standout by far. I mean, it's almost, I feel bad for saying it because it's so obvious, but Killers of the Flower Moon, which I did not see in theaters. Sorry, Marty. Ironically, this is the only one that I watched on my TV at home in not ideal conditions. It was really a bright morning. I could barely see the screen, but I loved this movie. I mean, love is a difficult word. I mean, I admire this movie so much as a work of art. I thought it was an incredible tonal accomplishment of this kind of horrible, horrible way that this story plays out. And the way that it's told makes it just so much more devastating. I think it's never quite been, I've never seen a movie like that. It has some of the grinding sadness of The Irishman, also very long. But I think he managed to apply some of those tonal aspects and just knocked it out of the park with this movie. Of course, it has little Marty, sort of like little Scorsese, treats and bits and bobs here and there, the kind of character actor moments. He throws in all of his favorite music in the background. You can hear his playlist going in the background. But this movie is an incredible account of telling the story of what happened in this in this town and what happened to these people. That is, it's devastating. Obviously, it's like not a thing to celebrate. There's a little bit of like a little bit of a moral quandary as to like making art out of this story. However, I think it was a worthy task for Scorsese and a great, addition to his list, to his oeuvre. So yeah, I love that movie. But yeah, kind of a bit of a boring, unsurprising take for me. But
All right, good take though. I'm ashamed to admit I have not yet seen Killers of the Flower Moon, despite the fact that it was my most anticipated movie of the year. I just did not get to it, which is driving me nuts. I'm sure I'll love it. I want to watch it really soon. For me, I'll do a quick rundown of the ones I really liked. I really did like Poor Things. I thought Barbie was a lot of fun, seeing it in the packed theater. I laughed a lot. Loved Ryan Gosling. I thought Beau Was Afraid was very bold and daring, even if not every choice 100% panned out. Really dug Asteroid City as well. And then the kind of the big two for me were Oppenheimer, which I will defend here a little bit. I'll endeavor to defend Oppenheimer. Not that it needs my defense, really. But this was the best Christopher Nolan movie, I think, in the past decade. It's the only one I've responded to emotionally in the past decade since I was like in high school. I thought it was absolutely enthralling. I thought that the 3 hours absolutely flew by for me. I thought that his editing in that kind of montage, dreamlike style that almost feels like Maliki, especially early in the movie, was incredibly well done. I thought just the flow of the story just really just drew you in. I thought the storytelling too and the progression of Oppenheimer's character, so incredibly played by Cillian Murphy, was just that incremental accretion of decisions over the course of the movie, and you see where he ends up versus where he starts with his relatively idealistic youth, and you see just those little compromises moment by moment throughout the film. Oh, that was very well done. Actually did remind me a bit of The Irishman. Not quite as heart-wrenching in the final calculus, but it definitely affected me emotionally. I thought that was some of it, Nolan's best writing and his best character work. I thought some of his best direction as well in a long time, some a little bit more impressionistic, a little bit more subjective. There were moments in the movie that I was like really stunned by. The moment where he's giving his kind of speech to his workers and his team after they've dropped the bomb, I thought was an amazing sequence. Almost felt like something out of a P.T. Anderson film. Really loved that. As far as the final stretch of the film with Robert Downey Jr., I can see why some people don't like that. I think it made sense in terms of the kind of a dramatization of the mutually assured destruction concept where both men lead to each other's downfall simultaneously. I thought the fact that we're dealing with this titanic thing, arguably the biggest thing that's happened in the past 100 years, we don't actually dramatize the results of that. We're just stuck in these boring rooms and we're dragged into the bureaucracy with this man talking to a security clearance. I thought that was kind of the point of the movie. And the fact that the lingering after effects are all off screen and unspoken, to me, really added to the movie's power. So I thought Oppenheimer was extremely successful at what it set out to do. And when it ended, I was just like, man, I didn't know he had that in him. I didn't know he could do something that interesting and that mature and that powerful. And I loved the dialogue and it drew me right in. So I loved it for all those reasons. The other movie I'll shout out real quick was Todd Haynes, May, December. I just watched this one. Did you see it, Anthony? You're nodding. Yeah, it's got Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman. Really fascinating character piece. I really cannot recommend this movie enough. Basically, it's loosely based on a true story about Julianne Moore's character is the woman who was a sex offender who basically raped a 7th grade boy in the past, and this is her years later living with him as her husband. And Natalie Portman comes in as an actor who's going to basically play Julianne Moore in a movie about this scenario. So this is all the things the movie's kind of about are all in the past, and we see how it affects all the characters in the present. Really absolutely fascinating character dynamics, really queasy and unsettling, but also fascinating. Just a really disturbing and enchanting movie in kind of the same way that Safe was back in the 90s, if you saw that. I know Connor's a big fan of that one. So that one's on Netflix. It's about 2 hours. Highly recommend that if you've not seen it. And those are probably my big two for this year.
We should one day do an Oppenheimer and a Killers episode, because I would defend, not quite to the extent Tony did, Oppenheimer, but I would not defend Killers of a Flower Moon, which I finally saw a couple weeks ago during the holidays, the way it was meant to be seen.
Very, very nice. Spicy.
Can we get a little capsule take, Anthony?
My quick capsule is, I don't know how to quite put it, but I was unconvinced by the storyline, and I thought Lily Gladstone's character and characterization of that moment was never given enough for us to kind of go forward into seeing this as kind of the twisted, sick, perverted love story it is. I thought it was kind of an acting showcase for Robert De Niro at times, when the kind of villainy of that overall situation is truly structural, truly racial, and like such a nightmare that the film gives us kind of easy ways of navigating it, that I thought were too simplistic for Scorsese. I mean, I could get into that more. I'm literally coming up with this on the spot. I had a few other thoughts, but I need to still ruminate a bit more.
I would do an ep on that.
That could be a good bonus ep. I think that might be good to revisit. But all right, folks.
So what I heard, just so we can summarize if quickly, what I heard is Connor, Anthony, and I all hated Oppenheimer, and Tony liked it for the nudity. That's what I heard. So, interesting choices. I don't know who's right, who's wrong.
That's why that's my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, is he finally put some nudity in it. That's all I wanted in his other films. So
okay, can I just talk about this one thing in Oppenheimer? When he pulls the fucking book off the wall, she pulls the script book, she opens it like this, like, can you read this? She's not even looking at it. She can't see the page. She opens it like into his face, and she's like, what does this say? And he's like, oh, that says I become death, destroyer of worlds. Oh, cool.
That is the only correct historically accurate.
That's literally what happened, Connor. He was saying in that quote, he says, I was having sex with this woman years ago, and she showed me a quote that really applies.
Totally random quote. Yeah, totally. Yeah. He doesn't even read the Sanskrit. He just it just says I become death, destroyer worlds. Actually, pretty cool, huh? Anyway, sorry.
And it was cool. It was cool, Christopher Nolan. I don't care what he says.
And it's called Los Alamos. That too. Lots of just little things like that.
Okay, the thing at the end, I did think the thing with the JFK MCU cameo at the end, where he's like, his name was Kennedy, was pretty funny.
Yeah,
okay, I'll give you that one. All right, I think we got to wrap it up here, but good year for movies. Good app. Looking forward to what are we doing? Oh yeah,
Love
Dogtooth
with you guys. Dogtooth. Right. Let's do it.
All right. See you next time.
Peace.